And now, your host, Jordan Sekulow.
It's no surprise to me that right now, as we're on the air with you, both the Trump campaign and the Biden campaign are in Florida in very different ways. Obviously, President Trump hosting a big in-person outdoor rally in Tampa. Vice President Biden, I think, will be doing probably something with a drive-up kind of rally thing. Polls show it within 1 point, so, I mean, it's the margin of error in Florida. But I think what is important to look at, we're going to talk about all of that, too, with Rick Grenell. He's coming up in the second segment of the broadcast, joining us live while he's traveling across the country because he is a special advisor to the ACLJ in one of his roles, and like we have roles as outside of the ACLJ as part of the president's legal team. Another one of his roles is with the RNC. So he's traveling the country as well. He'll be giving us an update from the ground in these battleground states that he's spent a lot of time in, and he's going to key in, too, on a couple of important things you can do and on what states he thinks are really the most key to this election, which we are only 5 days out from. But then we have seen something which is probably not going to get enough attention or people pass by quickly, which is this record GDP. U.S. economic growth growing at 33.1%. This is, again, a record-shattering pace. This was the third quarter. This was when the businesses started reopening after the COVID-19 shutdown. And this is the previous record was post-World War II was at 16.7% increase in 1950. So, again, even if you revive that, it may have been like 31. This is the largest ever GDP growth, 33% heading into Election Day, where we know bottom line voters that kind of wait to cast their votes that aren't very partisan, that small group that's kind of in the middle that hasn't kind of made up their mind, oftentimes it's about their pocketbook.
It sure is, Jordan, and these are really great numbers. These are great numbers for Americans of all political stripes, to be honest with you. I mean, you mentioned the 7.4% GDP growth annualized out to about 33%. Jordan, that makes up for about two-thirds of the economic hit that we took due to the coronavirus already coming back, a monumental achievement. One other sort of secondary number in here that I think is important for people to pay attention is that real consumer spending rose by almost 9%. That means people have realized that there's a little bit of extra money inside their budget, a little bit more extra money inside their checkbook, even though some of that stimulus did not happen because Speaker Pelosi blocked it. So their spending has increased by 9%. That's a big number. But Jordan, I think you're right that the story might get lost a little bit. But what that consumer spending number tells me is that the American people realize this. They have already started to feel the recovery, the revival come back, and therefore their spending increase. So even though the story itself might be lost, I think voters recognize and have already the impact of this recovery.
I mean, we don't usually play Joe Scarborough, who really turned on the president these last few years, but he understands politics as a former politician himself. He may not like this, but he said this on MSNBC this morning. Take a listen.
Bottom lining this for the election that everybody's looking at 5 days from now, Donald Trump's going to be able to run around and saying, this last quarter, the economy grew at a record rate, the highest rate ever, period, end of sentence.
The highest rate ever, period, end of sentence. That's quoting Joe Scarborough, and absolutely President Trump and his campaign should take that message to the voters. We'll be taking your phone calls at 1-800-684-3110. Logan's going to be joining me in the next segment, too, as we've got Rick Grenell joining us live. He is traveling across the country, so he's joining us by phone today. He'll be joining us again tomorrow. He'll be joining us on Election Day and on our election night coverage. He is traveling through those battleground states. As always, we want you to support the American Center for Law and Justice at aclj.org. That's aclj.org. We're going to be talking about this anonymous, who was an advisor at the time. Kind of puts the New York Times everything into question. So those tech CEOs that were testifying yesterday, we'll get into all of that in the mail-in ballots when we come back. All right, welcome back to Jay Sekulow Live. This is Jordan Sekulow. So with 5 days out, we're bringing in our special advisor on foreign policy and national security, former acting director of national intelligence from the Trump cabinet, and former ambassador to Germany. You know him well on our broadcast, Rick Grenell, who has been traveling the country, and I think can bring us a lot of insights. Rick, thanks for joining us. I know you're joining us right now from an airport.
Yes, I'm in Milwaukee, Jordan, and on my way to Detroit. And working hard. They're going to be in a different state every day till Election Day, trying to push hard for Donald Trump.
I was about to ask you, Rick, where you were heading next. So you're heading next so you've been in Wisconsin, I know, for a few days, then heading to Michigan. What kind of states, as you're on your travel schedule, as our audience has gotten to know you well over these past couple of months, what is your travel schedule looking like these next few days? So you to Wisconsin to Michigan. Are there other states that you're heading to?
Yeah, then I'm going to go to Minnesota and then finish the last 2 days in Pennsylvania. I'm going to do the western side in Pittsburgh and then also go into Philadelphia. So the last 2 days, really, I think the important focus of Pennsylvania. I think President Trump is looking pretty good in several states, and it may just boil down to Pennsylvania. And so we're trying to be as focused as we can with the message that President Trump is a president who is an outsider, working hard for the people. I see working class Americans like never before coming out and supporting the Republican Party, and I love it. I've waited a long time to actually have a president who appeals to the working class of America. And I think, today's job numbers, for instance, a huge spike in the economy is just reflective of what Donald Trump does best as an outsider, as a businessman, and he's going to focus the economy. And if we want to improve the economy after this COVID crisis, we're going to need to have a president who is a businessman.
Yeah, I mean, we got record GDP at 33% announced from the last quarter. I mean, this is historic numbers, even in the midst of COVID. So for the gross domestic product to be at that point. But Rick, you brought up something I think is very important. I know our audience are fired up about this. I told them today, I told them yesterday, they've got to make sure they voted, make sure their friends vote. This is that key time where you don't want to be there on Election Day and say, oh, I forgot to do this or I ran out of time. Get your plan together, figure out the rules in your state, make sure you know when you're going to go. If it's raining, bring a raincoat. If it's snowing, bring a jacket. But you brought up Pennsylvania, and I think it's very clear that we look at the polls every day. We see polls that are tightening, and I think that's fair. That states like Pennsylvania back in 2016 were won by half a percentage point. They're very close, and I expect them, likely, Rick, to be very close again, which will really does depend on not so much what's happening nationally, but who is got the most encouraged, who's got the most excited support base that's going to come out and vote regardless of what the weather's like that day, with COVID concerns and things like that, to show up on Election Day.
Yeah. And remember, Jordan, the way that we won Wisconsin, the way that the president won Wisconsin in 2016, the way that the president won Pennsylvania in 2016, is that he went and appealed to Republicans, conservatives who are already leaning to vote for him. And instead of making counties red, he made them blood red. They came out in huge numbers. I think that we have to look at the appointment of Amy Coney Barrett as just another sign of what President Trump will do. The reality is we will probably have 2 Supreme Court nominees in this next 4-year term. And so do you want to have Joe Biden picking the next 2 Supreme Court justices, or do you want Donald Trump to pick the next 2 Supreme Court justices? I think that President Trump has demonstrated what his picks will look like. And for me, I celebrate those picks, and I want more of them.
Well, I remember back in 2016, Rick, I was talking about the aging court. I don't like to put – you never know. I mean, you look at how Justice Ginsburg fought until the very end and served a lot longer than most people thought she would if you look back even 10 years ago or 15 years ago when she was first diagnosed with cancer. So she fought a long time to serve. But it was an aging court. And as you mentioned, there's still a couple on the court right now. You don't exactly know. But no one would have predicted necessarily that President Trump would have gotten more than 2, and he ended up with 3 nominees confirmed to the Supreme Court. And if they don't go the court-packing route but get 2 nominees, Rick, they could swing the court the other way.
100%. And that's why I think that you've got to look at what President Trump has done in the past, know that that's exactly his path, what he'll do in the future. And we have to be able to vote and know the implications. This is not an election about style. This is an election about substance. And it's incredibly important that we have people who go out and vote and vote for whomever they think is better of the two. This is a choice between two people. This is not an idealistic exercise. This is a choice between two people. One other point let me make, Jordan, is that I don't want people to be discouraged by these polls, because remember, when they look at let's say the returned early voting absentee ballots or return ballots or early voting, when you look at that whole process, you are assuming that everyone who requested a Democratic ballot is voting for Joe Biden. That is actually not true. I can tell you, I've been through all of Pennsylvania. There are a whole bunch of Democrats, traditional Democrats, who ask for the Democratic ballot, will return the Democratic ballot, but vote for Donald Trump. All these polls are assuming that if you are requesting a Democratic ballot, then you're obviously voting for Joe Biden, and that's not the case. I see working class people, the former Reagan Democrats, all of these people actually coming out and being very excited for Donald Trump.
Yeah, and Jordan, we saw yesterday, or not yesterday, last time, we even saw Bernie supporters. A lot of them were fed up the last election and ended up become Trump supporters because they didn't like that the Democratic Party had made this decision for them. So I think Rick is right, where you see even people from the farthest end of the spectrums who will come together because they don't like where that party is headed and what their party is doing. Some swing the one way, some swing the other, but still, it's that way. And speaking of voting and polling, I did want to say, Rick, thank you yesterday for sharing our Bald Beagle video. By the way, if any of you want to see and want to know and want to educate yourself and your kids on how the Electoral College works, we just put up a new video, and we got a little bit of attention. But I think we're doing the things right if we're getting attention from certain outlets who, Rick, just want to silence the simplest things, which is just explaining how this election works.
Well, one of the things that, Logan, I'm so excited that you're doing this cartoon series, this video series for kids. I'm so excited about it because when I go out and I talk to people constantly, one of the criticisms that we're getting is that the educational system is a mess, that we're teaching our children to literally go and hate the country, bow for the flag. And we've really abandoned the educational system so much that what you're doing by educating kids this way, I think we've got to keep at it for 20 years to completely change the next generation. Educate them in the ways of America and not to be embarrassed by America. We are the greatest country in the history of the world, and we should always remember that. So I'm excited about this series. Am I allowed to call it a cartoon series? Do we still call it cartoons?
There's cartoons, there's puppets. It's kind of just a kids channel is what we have. I think that's the best way to put it. A kids channel for great content. Again, we just put up our new video, What is the Electoral College, with puppets and animation. Your kids will enjoy it. You'll enjoy it. You're going to learn something. And again, we got blowback from some of the far left, and I feel like I'll take that as a badge of honor at this point.
Yeah, it's so absurd. I mean, it's just explained. This is how this election is going to be determined, is by the Electoral College, and who wins the most Electoral College votes
Just how it
by
works in
state.
general.
And
it's not a partisan thing.
No,
but we were conservative, right-wing Christian propagandists.
Rick, I know as you're traveling through, I know we're going to have you on the broadcast again tomorrow, and then I think on Election Day and the day after, and so. But for right now, to just your message to people who are, some of the early voting is finishing up in some states today. Some of it continues. What is your message to people who want to see President Trump reelected? And what should they be doing right now?
What I would say is that you have to understand that President Trump is the outsider, and everybody on the inside in Washington, D.C., who've been there for 40 years, 45 years, 47 years, they're desperate to get somebody in Washington at the White House who plays by their rules. Their rules are not what Americans like. And so I think it's really important right now to make sure that we're voting for the outsider. Donald Trump has had our back for 4 years. We now need to have his back. We need to make sure that this is a strong vote for capitalism and for America. I think the reality is that what's happened to the left today is a really scary place. They're trying to defund the police. They're trying to tear down America, and we got to stop them.
All right, folks. Rick Grenell. It's always awesome to have him join us. We always clip his interviews too, so we'll post on social media if you missed any of that. Be on the broadcast with us again tomorrow. We're watching this very closely. We're going to be right back on Jay Sekulow Live, analyzing all this information, looking at court cases, and also this anonymous, we may talk about that with Rick tomorrow, this anonymous low-level staffer the New York Times was promoting. We'll be right back on Jay Sekulow Live. All right, welcome back to Jay Sekulow Live. This is Jordan Sekulow. It's great to have Rick on, and we will have Rick back on tomorrow. We're going to have Rick on Election Day, the day after as well, and he'll be joining us on our special election night coverage, too, that we'll be bringing you on Facebook and Periscope, and we'll be in the studio that evening bringing you election coverage. As some of us are also going to be doing other television broadcasts and things like that during the coverage, but we've got a big team ready for you. My dad will be leading that, so you won't want to miss that on election night. My message to all of you, too, if you're just joining us on the broadcast, make sure you know, if you have not already voted, how you're going to vote, when you're going to vote. This is the time to do it, folks. Early voting in some states comes to a close today. In other states, it continues. Understand and know your state's rules. Know where you need to be if you're going to wait to vote on Election Day. Know where that is. Plan to have some time. Plan for weather. Don't get into the parking lot and be discouraged. Your vote matters. This is a very close election, regardless of who you're voting for. At the national level for presidential, the balance of the Senate, so the balance of Congress. Will there be a Republican Senate? And then, of course, at your state level, you've got important House races at the federal level, and you've got important state and local races that you need to be involved in. But you need to prepare. Look towards how the weather's supposed to be. Look towards where you're supposed to be if you haven't already voted. Make sure you follow the guidelines that you have to. Don't get into a fight over mask wearing. If they say you need to wear a mask, wear the mask. Your vote counts more than wearing the mask for that time you got to be in line and casting your vote. I'm just telling you this at that point. It's not the day to have that battle. And to make sure also, call broadcasts like ours and organizations like the ACLJ if you see problems on Election Day. Just plan for all of that. I just want that message out loud and clear. Andy Economou is joining us in the studio. So is Stan Bennett. And I want to get to this number. It is huge. And then we're going to get into some of the new mail-in ballot information as well. But Andy, just your reaction, the fact that we now have the largest economic growth, 33.1% ever in history, the largest GDP ever in history. The previous record was 16.7%, and that was post-World War II.
Right. Yeah, the gross domestic product, which is the broadest measure of goods and services produced across the economy, really surged by 33.5% on an annualized basis in the 3-month period, July through September. Even in view of the pandemic and the coronavirus situation that we are facing, the Commerce Department said in its first reading that we heard of the data, which came out today. So, as you said, the previous post-World War II record was 16.7% increase in 1950. So we have expanded really by 31%. This is an amazing growth in the gross domestic product in light of what some would call the recession caused by the coronavirus. And so I see it, in my view, as the direct result of President Trump, who has made restoring what was a totally vibrant economy before the pandemic hit from the coronavirus downturn into the centerpiece and the focal point of his bid for re-election next Tuesday. And I think that the fact that it has jumped to what it has jumped to, and the stock market, yes, is volatile. I understand that. The stock market is a different indicator. Yep. It's an up and down situation. It's a testy, funny thing. It reacts one day one way and the other day another day, but you cannot.
Especially around election time.
Or especially then when the volatility hits, because one day it's up 800 and then it's down 700 and so forth. That's not the thing to look at. The thing to look at is something like this. Economic growth in the United States from July through September, according to the Commerce Department, is up 33.1%. That is really something to talk about.
Let me get to a call in just a minute, but I think this is important to play too, just for our audience. If you want to talk to us in air, 1-800-684-3110. We want the reports from you on the ground, especially if you're in these battleground states or if you got questions about what's happening in your state. Give us a call at 1-800-684-3110. This is Senator Debbie Dingle. She's a Democrat from Michigan. She was talking on MSNBC about one of the events she held in her state, and she's a little panicky here and a little nervous. Take a listen, because if you think and you see these polls and you think, oh, they're just Joe Biden's got too big a lead in this state and Trump too big of a lead in another state, just stop listening to him. You know what? Every state is up for grabs. Imagine it that way, that every potential state is up for grabs because of the balloting issues, because of the COVID issues. And Debbie Dingle, a senator from Michigan, she knows it. Take a listen.
Yesterday I had some of the auto workers who I thought were going to go back to Joe Biden were very clear with me last night. They were voting for President Trump. And I think what we're seeing now is that on the ground, people have to turn out their votes.
What she's worried about there, Than, is that labor union voters, so those auto workers who are likely labor voters, are yet again in Michigan, like Rick Grenell was talking about in the second segment just a few minutes ago, and where he's heading actually right now, while he's at the airport to head to Detroit, is that those blue-collar workers that have been very difficult for Republicans in the past to turn out, but President Trump did in 2016, are turning out again, and we're hearing it from very reliable sources like a Democrat U.S. senator saying, we better make sure our turnout is strong because those white blue-collar auto workers in Michigan are turning out again for President Trump.
Yeah, this doesn't surprise me at all, Jordan. This is a point I've made on this broadcast many times. It was a rarity in 2016 that President Trump was able to win the Rust Belt. If you think of the Rust Belt as Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, and Wisconsin, some people would throw in Minnesota as well. But if you think of it as those four states, he swept those four states. And Jordan, voter behavior is something that the onus is always on the candidate who did not win those voters the last time. So there's sort of a learned behavior there. The most natural instinct for a voter is to go into the ballot box and pull the lever for the same candidate they did last time, unless there's a significant reason to change that. And if you look at the last 4 years and the message that President Trump won on in those four states, Jordan, he's delivered on that message. So if anything, I think the voters in those states that sort of make up that economic profile are more likely to vote for President Trump in greater numbers. And that's why I've said on this broadcast many times, I think the candidate that wins two of the three states between Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania is going to be the next occupant of the White House. And if I'm Joe Biden or Donald Trump, I would much prefer to be the candidate who got those voters vote the last time around. So look, I agree with Debbie Dingle. I think that's where the race really hangs in the balance. And I would rather have the candidate profile of the president than the challenger.
Yeah, Irene wrote in, if the president carries Pennsylvania, how damaging is that for Biden? Let me tell you something. Rick Grenell was just talking about that. That's the next place he heads after he gets to Michigan. And he'll be joining us again tomorrow. But he said, Pennsylvania will probably be the key state. I think everyone realizes that on both sides. There's other key states. There's other states that need to fall. President Trump needs to win Florida. Biden needs to win Pennsylvania. So does Trump. I think that is a key indicator. Because if Democrats can't hold Pennsylvania yet again, they're in serious probably electoral trouble to put the electoral votes together. We come back. We're going to take your calls. We're going to talk about the anonymous high-level staffer who, at the time, this anonymous guy was a policy advisor to a department head and then became chief of staff for a few weeks. But when they announced him as a high-level person, a senior administration official, he wasn't. So who else is the New York Times lying about when they talk about anonymous sources? We'll talk about that and more when we get back. Second half hour, Jay Sekulow Live.
We're in a fight for life that is incredible right now.
Barbaric and horrific. This is the New York State's law on unrestricted abortion. No protection for the unborn child.
Not only did they pass it, they celebrated it.
Zero protection. Used to have personhood protection.
Right.
Now they don't.
That is now all completely repealed.
We've handled a series of cases involving those that are being persecuted for their faith.
They called it terrorism, but they actually use in the indictment itself the word Christianization.
A principal comes and yanks your Bible away.
A teacher became aware that the student was reading from the Bible
We're here standing for these kids and their families.
Prohibited from meeting with other Christians during recess.
We do have to fight against them when they occur. Otherwise, those abuses will win the day.
This is a fight that you're going to have to be engaged in. It's already a long-term struggle. It is not over.
We are so grateful to the people who prayed for us, and we are so grateful for ACLJ.
Live from Washington, D.C., Jay Sekulow Live. And now, your host, Jordan Sekulow.
All right, welcome back to Jay Sekulow Live. So I do want to start taking some of your phone calls out, and of course, we want to hear from people in battleground states across the country. If you've got questions about this, we're 5 days out from the election, and we're talking about all of these issues, important states, and the GDP number. I'm also going to educate you about a little bit about these mail-in ballots. What states, especially the key states, that will kind of determine the election electorally, can you start vote? Can they actually start counting now? What states leave it up to the local officials, and what states do you have to wait until Election Day? And sometimes until the election is over, until voting is over, to actually start counting the ballots, and how that could impact, of course, election night. So we'll talk about that. I first wanted to talk about this. So you had this anonymous, right, coming out and writing. First it was an op-ed, then it was a book in 2018 talking about some internal resistance to Donald Trump and President Trump. And we now know that this was a staffer, not at the White House, not some senior advisor to the president. In fact, it was an advisor to the former head of the Department of Homeland Security, who became chief of staff for a few weeks, but wasn't even chief of staff to the Department of Homeland Security when the New York Times called him a senior administration official. And I mean, the swarm around could it be someone like John Kelly, the chief of staff? Could it be someone, an actual cabinet member, someone who did interact with the president, or someone inside the White House? This guy was a policy advisor to a department head, and then temporarily for a few weeks, a chief of staff, which draws into question, one, CNN hired this guy in September, asked him in August if you were anonymous, and he lied to CNN. Take a listen.
There was an op-ed, there was a book by someone calling themselves anonymous. Are you aware of who that is?
I'm not. Look, and that was a parlor game that happened in Washington, D.C., of a lot of folks trying to think of who that might be. I've got my own thoughts about who that might be, but I want my focus to be on the president, and I certainly don't want to. I wear a mask for two things, Anderson: Halloweens and pandemics. So no.
So he lies to CNN. CNN still hires him, by the way, as advisor. They said yesterday it was the first time they knew he was anonymous. Baloney. I'd use other language, but kids may be listening. Baloney. You look at this, and people are actually laughing about it. I mean, even mainstream media. Jonathan Swan from Axios said this is an embarrassment for the New York Times. I didn't realize the definition of, quote, senior administration official could be this expansive. Wasn't even agency chief of staff at the time the op-ed ran. Rick Grenell was just joining us. He said, what a bust. I can't stop laughing. Everyone is like, who? Because they played this up to be that this person was someone who had direct ties to the president, who was really pushing back on the president. And instead, this was someone, as Kayleigh McEnany said, who was someone that you never heard of, and ultimately a low-level, disgruntled former staffer, a liar, a coward, and who was and only lasted a few weeks in the position as chief of staff to a department head. I mean, Andy, this is what I think it draws into question. It's not just this person, but every time they say an anonymous senior administration official, are they talking about kids?
Yeah, they could be. I mean,
do not interact with the President of the United States.
That's correct. This is, of course, typical of what you expect from the Washington Post and the New York Times. I'm not surprised of anything that comes out of those two garbage publications, because that's what they are. But for the New York Times to pride itself and to go and say all the news that's fit to print and to be the premier, media journal in the United States, and then to hire a guy who basically, according to Mark Meadows, and I agree, he says, you've got to be kidding me, Miles Taylor, that's who the New York Times granted an anonymous editorial article. I've seen more more exciting reveals in Scooby-Doo episodes. What a monumental embarrassment. That's Mark Meadows, the president's chief of staff. That's exactly what this is.
It's an embarrassment. It's also dangerous because you've got this situation where who else are they going to claim as this high-level person? And people were, they were pointing fingers at all these other people who were not this anonymous. So it was caught, again, disastrous for CNN and a joke. We'll be right back.
For 30 years, the American Center for Law and Justice has been dedicated to protecting your religious and constitutional freedoms. Because of you, we've seen great success in the courts and Congress concerning the issues that matter most to you and your families. ACLJ Chief Counsel Jay Sekulow.
Our decades-long commitment to the Constitution and the rule of law is at the center of everything we do. The bottom line, our work could not take place without your generous support.
It's a critical time for our nation and our world. With so many challenges facing our country, the work of the American Center for Law and Justice has never been more important. There's no better way to support the ACLJ than through online giving.
We truly appreciate your financial support. Without it, it would be impossible to do our work here and around the globe. And the best way to support our work is to make your financial gifts online at aclj.org.
Donating online is safe and secure, and an online gift at aclj.org can be put to work immediately, enabling the ACLJ to continue the battle against abortion giant Planned Parenthood.
These are young people in their 20s and 30s that are doing this, are fighting for life at a whole new level to beat back the abortion juggernaut. We've got a whole group of young lawyers that are defending them.
To protect Christians facing persecution.
The release of Andrew Brunson. He is the American evangelical from North Carolina, held in Turkey for more than 2 years.
We're grateful to ACLJ who put it out to these people, they were getting all this out.
I'm thankful, I'm grateful, and actually I'm astounded.
To stand up for our good friend Israel. To work to uncover the corrupt deep state in Washington, and so much more. Make a difference today. Support the work of the ACLJ online at aclj.org. Every dollar makes a difference. Give today online at aclj.org.
Back to Jay Sekulow Live. So I think, we debunked the fact that Miles Taylor should be fired from CNN. He lied to their hosts, unless they were all in on it, which they probably were. That's why I called it baloney. But he's a kid. He was at the highest level he got was a chief of staff to a department head. And it's an important agency, Department of Homeland Security, but he was there for a few weeks as chief of staff. When he wrote the op-ed as some senior administration official, he was a policy analyst. And this is not to put down policy analysts at different agencies around the federal government, but they are not senior administration officials that interact daily with the President of the United States, which is how the New York Times put this out. And this person wrote a book on Anonymous. They made a big deal. Again, disastrous for the left. He's a kid. It's a kid that and more disastrous is that you can now call into question every time they say senior administration official, anonymous at the New York Times, that they're just quoting children, the youngest people. And when I say children, I mean low-level political appointees who are trying to get jobs at CNN, trying to make a name for themselves, trying to play it cool with reporters, get book deals, make more money than they ever would in the government, and or probably in their life by spinning tales of stories that they couldn't have had access to. So I think that should he face legal consequences? Maybe. But I will let the Department of Justice handle that one. But it does show you that when you see that word anonymous and senior administration official next to it, I want to go to Wes Smith on this. Wes, when you see that now in the New York Times, just imagine some kid who's got barely maybe some access to a member of the cabinet, but that's it.
Yeah, and journalistic standards are such, you're not supposed to print anonymous, opinion pieces. I've been around long enough. I've written articles over the years. They will not print something if you won't put your name to it. Anonymous is
accusations.
Yeah, it's a no-go in the journalistic world, but apparently not anymore. All of us here, we believe in the importance of a free press and the First Amendment and all of that. But what we're witnessing with the New York Times and a lot of the mainstream media, whether it's this kid who claimed to be a senior administration official, or all this going on with Hunter Biden and Tony Bobulinski, what we're seeing, Jordan, and it's disturbing to those of us who love America, and most of us do, it's a prostitution of the First Amendment, where they really are more about political opportunism. There's not objective reporting. It's political bias that is disguising itself somehow as news. And it's disheartening, I think, for most American people. And this whole story is a cruel joke.
I want to go to the phones. People have been holding on the line. If you want to talk to us in there, 1-800-684-3110. Paul's calling in from California on line one. Hey, Paul, welcome to Jay Sekulow Live.
Oh, thank you for taking my call.
Thanks for being on the air.
I wanted to make a comment. And I had a little concern. So I was driving to work today, and on the overpass there was a sign that said, "If you vote for Trump, you're a racist." And that concerned me greatly because I grew up in a household of conservative Democrats. My parents were conservative, so back then we were able to disagree with people, but it concerned me when I saw that sign, because if the platform is saying, or the people that are going to vote not for Trump are saying that if you don't vote like we are voting, or if you disagree with us, you're racist. And that is not what I think we should devolve into.
No, that is the great fear that is what we've already devolved into. Now, Paul, you're in California, so you're probably experiencing that more than people in other states. But we see the riots, we see the protests, we see the name calling. Than, this term racist is now used. I was listening to CNN yesterday, and the daytime host, went on a rant calling basically the president a racist and saying, he references 1950s TV shows, and because of that, he's a racist. And because he says that because some of his campaign advisors say that some women voting, they're concerned about their husband's jobs. That's sexist, even though that can be true still. It's not that, of course, there's more women in the workforce, but that doesn't mean the women in the workforce aren't also concerned about their husband's jobs and incomes. It's just this idea that's being promoted, then, that you're bad, you're a bad person, you're a racist, you're terrible if you vote for Donald Trump. Now, of course, you vote with anonymity. That is something we're able to do in our country. We talk about the silent majority speaking out. And I do believe that if it does, in a way where we're able to see this kind of wave election for President Trump on election night, maybe the early morning the next day, that will silence a lot of that. There may be protest and there may be some problems here and there, but they're going to realize quickly this is where America's at.
Yeah, Jordan, it's gotten out of control, quite frankly, and it's not just troubling. I really think it's dangerous. Look, our pursuit of a more perfect union, that's the phrase that our founders used. Our pursuit of a more perfect union requires pursuing unity, but not uniformity, Jordan. I mean, we have to allow a varying degree of opinions, not just from the electorate, but also from our public officials, and there shouldn't be anyone, arbitrating that. And, I would tie this back to the conversation that you alluded to in a segment or two ago about the big tech CEOs that were on Capitol Hill yesterday, and they have been getting engaged in this, Jordan. They have been trying to moderate and censor differences of opinion, and in fact, they have now suspended the account of the head of the Customs of Border Patrol for doing what, Jordan? For advocating and for promoting the building of the wall that has happened along the border, something that, by the way, that person probably knows more about than anybody else in the country, and yet Twitter has suspended his account for engaging in what they call hateful speech. Jordan, that cannot be allowed. If you disagree with the head of the Customs and Border Patrol, how about you debate him on the issues? Don't pull down his speech, engage in speech that counters his.
Yeah, he's talking about the border wall, which is part of his job. It's nothing new. The president literally ran on this in the last election, said build the wall, build the wall. So the Customs and Border Patrol is who would build the wall. He tweets about the wall, and suddenly, his Twitter account is now shut down. This is the day after the Twitter CEO was before the Senate Judiciary Committee, and this is Jack Dorsey, the CEO of Twitter, being asked questions about election interfering by Ted Cruz. Take a listen.
Does Twitter have the ability to influence elections?
No.
You don't believe Twitter has any ability to influence elections?
No, we are one part of a broad spectrum of communication channels that people have.
So you're testifying to this committee right now that Twitter, when it silences people, when it censors people, when it blocks political speech, that has no impact on elections?
People have choice of other communication channels with which.
Not if they don't hear information. If you don't think you have the power to influence elections, why do you block anything?
Exactly right. If you don't think you have any influence, if you don't think you matter, Twitter, why are you even moderating anything? I mean, you're concerned about terrorism, so obviously you matter. You're concerned about ISIS using your technology to spread its message because you matter. It does matter. And when you start shutting down top-ranking government officials' accounts, I mean, Andy, when you think about that, high-ranking officials, head of U.S. Customs and Border Patrol, 5 days before an election, because he talks about something that we've been talking about for 3.5, more years, building the wall, and they shut him down.
Who knows more about it than that person?
Right.
Who's on the scene, who sees what's going on at the border, and who has the greatest understanding. And you tell me that you don't have the power to influence elections by cutting that person off from one of the biggest, one of the largest media of communication, this Twitter. I don't use it, but it's used by millions and millions. And you telling me that by closing it down that you haven't suppressed his right or her right to free speech and to influence an election or not to influence an election? That's ridiculous. And Ted Cruz called him on that and should have done that.
Was
a real show of hypocrisy, and insincerity. And they want it both ways, Jordan. Section 230 protects them from liability for things that are posted. So they want that, but at the same time, they want to squelch things that are posted. And, it's not like they're going to be liable for a lawsuit. No, they want it both ways. They want Section 230 to protect them, right, but they also want to shut down anybody that disagrees with them.
It's one thing, Mark Zuckerberg makes the case, well, this is why we have the internet, because we allowed it to kind of foster, and we had the Section 230 protections. But you had those protections before you started going in there and censoring political speech. It's one thing if you want to censor violence, pornography, things that are illegal, okay. You should be looking out for things like that. But political speech, that is a real problem area. And then you have to wonder, of course we want this free and open internet. We want to lead the world in that. But you can't just selectively choose your politics. You start doing that, and the government's not going to be that favorable to you anymore. They're not going to write favorable laws. They don't have to. Nothing in our law says you've got to give them that Section 230 protection. In fact, that could be revoked immediately if Congress wants to do that and the president wants to sign that. So I think they've got to get their act together. Just to leave you with this before we get to the next segment, but during this commercial break, and we're taking your phone calls too. In the final segment, I want to take a lot of your calls too. So any question you've got about the election or comments, give us a call, 1-800-684-3110. Even if you got to vent a little, because we're 5 days out, 1-800-684-3110. We'll go to Kathy first in Kentucky. But think about this. The BuzzFeed link to Christopher Steele's dossier, that's still up on Twitter. You can retweet that as much as you want. The New York Post Hunter Biden story is still blocked on Twitter. Just think about that. The debunked dossier, still available to tweet, not the Hunter Biden story. All right, welcome back to Jay Sekulow Live. This is Jordan Sekulow. We are taking your phone calls at 1-800-684-3110. I want to go right to the phones. Kathy's been holding on from Kentucky. It's got an important Senate race there, of course, Mitch McConnell. And it could be, again, this is one Democrats spend a lot of money on. Kathy, welcome to Jay Sekulow Live. You're on the air.
Thank you for taking my call. I do have something to vent about. I think we are really in the stage where Scripture talks about when evil is called good and good is called evil. And I have a specific question, though. A week or two ago, I heard President Trump say at a rally that they had found a bunch of ballots, primarily from military folks, in the trash. And I'm just wondering, can you tell us what happens to those?
Yeah, we talked about that. So there were ballots found. Some were marked for President Trump that were dumped in like a stream in a couple of different states. And then the FBI got involved, and I think they've rectified that situation. But those were specifically military ballots that, again, you want to make sure every member of our military is able to vote. I mean, for goodness sakes, they put their life on the line for our country. And we have a process, of course, because they're all over the world, for them to be able to do that and get those ballots in on time. But that is one of the issues with mail-in ballots. Now, Than, the Democrats, they feel very good about the fact they've seen a lot of mail-in ballots come in, a lot of early voting come in. I think but they are also starting to sound the alarm, as Debbie Dingle did, and we played it earlier, that on Election Day turnout, they could be blown out of the water.
Yeah, well, first of all, I think it's kind of interesting that the Postal Service was deemed, the most credible and capable entity to help in the elections until now. Now, all of a sudden, they don't want you to send your mail through your ballot through the mail because it might not get there in time. I think that's pretty telling in and of itself. But to the caller's question, Jordan, I mean, every time one of these situations come up, the first question that I ask is, okay, how many of these instances did we not find about? Because that situation, maybe that's been remedied, but how many of these instances of ballots that disappear will never come to light, and will that make a difference? Look, I hearken back to the recommendation that you gave voters just a few minutes ago, Jordan. I think at this point, you need to take responsibility over your own ballot. You need to get it to your polling place. You need to drop it in the box. You need to cast it in person if you can, and make sure, do everything in your power, Jordan, to take ownership over your own ballot and make sure it gets to the place where it's going to be counted. I do think that we need to be vigilant against fraud, but I think there's a role that we can play in making it as difficult as possible to tamper with our own individual ballots.
This is an interesting call coming in from Lisa in Maryland as we talk about, we've been preaching this, like get your ballot in, drop it off at the location it needs to be. If you're doing that mail-in, or now you can drop off. Or if you don't have that, you need to figure out. And again, I'd say that for anybody out there who is not specific, doesn't have a specific pre-existing condition where COVID might affect them, and I'll tell you, they're taking all the concerns they need to at voting places and early voting. If you can go early vote in person and actually cast your ballot in person, do it. And if you can't do that until Election Day, do it on Election Day. See your ballot go in and be counted and actually be part of the process. I'm telling you, do not. I know we've got a caller calling in about what's happened in Maryland, and I think that's important too, because everybody doesn't have these options. So, Lisa, tell people about Maryland specifically.
Hi, you're right in the beginning. Please, everyone, take your ballot. If you ask for your ballot to be mailed, you can mail it in. If you don't feel safe with the Postal Service, especially this late date, drop it off at the drop box or go in. They have a yellow envelope. You can put it in there. It is very sealed. If not, if you decide to take that mail-in ballot and tear it up or just get rid of it, you want to come in and to vote, you will be able to vote, but we call it a provisional voting. That provisional voting will be you will be able to vote, but your vote do not count until 10 to 15 days after the election. If you have that mail-in ballot, just please drop it off. Otherwise, your vote will not be counted until later after the election. It will be counted, but it'll be after. But if you mail it in, if you take it to the drop box, and if you take it inside the voting booth, because we have a place there too, it will be counted right away. So it's very important if everyone just
that's a message. Thank you, Lisa. I know you're an election worker from Maryland. And Than lives there. He said there's mail-in ballots. The boxes are all over the place. They're very easy to find. They're fast. And like what Lisa's saying, then they get in immediately and they get counted. Let me just go through this list, 'cause I think this is important. It's for those of you preparing for Election Day. This is how they count, because Lisa was talking about this, absentee or mail-in ballots. So who is allowed to count ballots? Who can actually start doing the counts now? So before Election Day. In kind of key battleground states, here's the states that can actually open the ballots and start taking a tally of, did you vote for Trump? Did you vote for Biden? The other candidates too. In Arizona, Colorado, Florida, and North Carolina, you can do that. Now, that's not the full list. It also includes Delaware, Hawaii, Maryland, Montana, Nebraska, Nevada, New Jersey, Oregon, and Vermont. In those 13 states, they can start counting the ballots that came in by mail. So they can actually start tallying them. They don't have to wait. In another 6 states, statutes don't specify it, or they leave the decision to local officials. The most key state there is Ohio. So in Ohio, at some local levels, they may be able to start counting and tallying the actual votes. This is important if you want to know the outcome in a state on election night. And you will see then the remaining states. So after you get through those 19 states, I'll get everyone's just quick reaction to this as we finish out the broadcast today. The rest of the country, 31 states, guys, they don't get to start opening those ballots and counting them until the polls are closed. Andy?
Yeah, that's right. I'm from Georgia.
And we know we're at like somewhere around almost 80 million.
Right. And in Georgia, we don't start counting the votes until the actual polls have closed at 7 o'clock on voting day. And I voted in person. I always have. It's just the way I am and just the way I feel more comfortable. But I think, as you said, Jordan, you need to become familiar with the balloting procedure in each of your states and the states that you mentioned. And be sure that your vote is counted, whether it's quickly prior to the election, as permitted in some states, or whether it's after. I think the important thing is to vote, and because voter turnout is going to be so significant and so important in this election, where, what is it so far? How many people have voted? 80 million?
About 80 million.
So far. I mean, that's a tremendous turnout, and it's going to be even more come November 3rd.
I vote in Georgia also, like Andy does, and I vote in person. I voted in person last week, early voting, simply because there's so much hoopla surrounding this election, and it's going to be so close. And Georgia is going to be extremely close if you believe the polls. So, yeah, we need to vote, and I did vote in person.
Dan?
I'd just say tens of millions of ballots cast in a way that maybe some of these states aren't used to, and then not allowing counting until that day. Jordan, I think people need to be prepared, even if it's a legitimate outcome, that it could be a very late night or maybe even a couple days after that.
Yeah, I mean, just to count the ballots, especially in so many states where you cannot. They haven't changed. They may have changed the rules on mail-in balloting, but they didn't change the rules on when they could start actually tallying those ballots up and opening them up. And so, if you're waiting till 8 o'clock at night in those places to even open those up. In those battleground states, where I know in Pennsylvania they're up to almost 2 million mail-in ballots, and that was not on the list. I mean, that can, again, play a key role. We'll take your calls tomorrow on Jay Sekulow Live. Go to aclj.org. Rick Grenell will be joining us again tomorrow on the broadcast as we lead up to Election Day.